Hey, Joe, how are you?
Good, Will. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to see you. I think our last time we talked was over the phone, so it's nice to be a little closer to face to face.
I know, isn't that very cool? I appreciate you coming on and doing this. We were all very excited to have you come on, and I've been watching your Twitter account the last week or so, and you've had a lot to say. And I thought, oh, I gotta get Will on because I feel like he could probably say some things that he wouldn't have said before. So
It is sort of newly. It feels a little liberating to no longer be in the state senate because there. Let's just say there are fewer things in my Twitter drafts and more things that I can actually tweet.
yeah. Well, I look forward to diving into some of that stuff. Let me do a formal introduction. Will Haskell is a former state senator representing Connecticut's 26th district, and he's the author of 100,000 First Bosses My Unlikely Path as a 22-year-old Lawmaker. Will retired at the end of his 2023 term to attend law school. You're such an overachiever. I love it.
I
Um,
grimace a little bit at the word retire as a 26-year-old, but it's true. Joe,
Well,
thanks for having me. Thrilled
my
to be talking.
pleasure. Before we really get into some of the fun stuff, I wanted to ask you about Quentin Williams, affectionately known as Q, who passed away on Inauguration Day. You guys came in around the same time. Um, I mean, it seemed like everybody loved this guy, an electric smile, just a really warm person. And if you could just take a couple minutes and just tell us again, you guys came in as freshmen at the same time. What was that like, and what was he like?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning Q's passing, Joe. It felt like a punch in the gut to all of us who had the honor of knowing him and working alongside him. You know, it's politics, and there aren't many people at the state capitol who just managed to put a smile on everybody's face, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, whether they are staffers, whether they are activists, whether they are lobbyists, whether they are elected officials. Everybody in the Capitol building absolutely loved Q. And like you said, he and I arrived at the legislature at the very same time and learned the ropes together. But something I so appreciated about Representative Williams is that while we learned the rules of how that building operates together, Q was always determined to change the rules a little bit, to change the system for the better, to make democracy more welcoming, more inclusive, more compassionate. So what we saw out of Q in the last few sessions was not just that he had mastered how to bring about reform in Connecticut, but he also wanted to reform our democracy for the better. And his voice is going to be really sorely missed at the Capitol. I will miss him as a friend, and I'm sad for the state of Connecticut because we will all miss him, I think, as a lawmaker and a reformer.
Yeah. Again, everything I've seen and heard from a lot of your fellows, especially the Democrats in the House, are absolutely crushed by his passing. And again, it was just shocking news to hear that. Especially on such a big day. You and I had talked leading up to the election. Let's talk about that for a hot minute because boy, oh boy, I'll be honest, I was a little bit nervous about the Republicans, about with the high inflation, with the price of gas, the price of groceries, this nonsense about crime being out of control. They love, the same comparison to immigration is all out of control, and it's like the Wild West, and it's obviously meant to fearmonger. And I was really afraid that it was having an effect. It felt to me like it was having an effect. And then election day came. And clearly, I would say this. I'm a big Susan Bisowitz fan. Ned Lamont, he's just a weird guy to me. Okay. Everyone reacts when I say that. They understand what I mean. She's always made me feel very comfortable, but he's just a weird guy. I think he did an amazing job when all was said and done. The number one issue people kept bringing up before this election was the economy, which again is why I was like, oh no, this could be really bad. The poll numbers seem to indicate, even though that was what was on their mind, they didn't seem to hold inflation against Ned Lamont, which was fair.
Mm-hmm.
And the job he's done to balance the books in Connecticut, I think, makes you believe that a businessman actually can be in an executive branch office and do well.
It's very true. I was Joe. In full disclosure, I was a little nervous leading up to election day too. Not for myself because I wasn't on the ballot this year, but I was nervous for every other Democrat on the ballot. Nervous about rolling back the progress that we'd made as a state and as a country. I knew we were going to be okay when I was poll standing at early in the morning, early for me anyways, 7:30 a.m. And all of a sudden, I met 18-year-old after 18-year-old after 18-year-old who was ready to cast their very first vote. And I didn't ask them who they were voting for, but I could tell by the eagerness with which they walked into the voting booth that they were ready and eager to support the Party of Progress, the Party of Change, and that's, in my view, the Democratic Party. What we found out that night as the numbers came in is that actually young people showed up at the highest rate they had in about 30 years. They made history in not just tweeting and protesting, but actually doing the hard work of democracy, of showing up on election day in that early morning and making sure that your voice is heard. A stunning analysis I saw found that 18 to 29-year-olds voted at such high numbers and favored Democrats so overwhelmingly that they actually managed to cancel out the vote of those who were one for one over the age of 65, because
Wow.
folks over the age of 65 voted in really high numbers, but they overwhelmingly supported Republicans. So young people showed up, and I think saved the country, prevented a red wave from coming, and ensured that we have a Democratic Senate. We have a House that is admittedly Republican, but with a pretty small margin and an unclear ability to govern. And here in
we'll get to them in a minute.
I hope so. And then
Yeah.
here in Connecticut, make sure that we continue to have a strong Democratic majority, that we continue to have Governor Ned Lamont in office to keep us safe and to keep our economy growing. And I'll just end where you left off, which is on the economy. Look, I think top of mind for a lot of voters this year was the right to have an abortion. The Supreme Court is obviously rolling that one back. The right to cast your vote fairly and conveniently. The Supreme Court is also threatening that right. And then, of course, COVID-19. That we all experienced a global pandemic, and I think a lot of people, for the first time maybe in years, felt really lucky to live in Connecticut. Our schools were open and they were high quality. People had access to tests and masks and plexiglass and vaccines. I can't tell you how many people I met outside the polls on election day just said, I feel so lucky to live here. And as a result, I think that those people walked in and they voted to continue to give Governor Ned Lamont the chance to serve our state, to give him another 4 years.
Well, I agree with that too. I think by and large, people a lot of the times will talk about the high taxes in Connecticut. Places with high taxes are generally desirable places. It's places where people do want to live. And it also means that you get stuff, that you do have great schools and other resources. And I would say, I pay a lot of money in taxes. I live in Wethersfield. Between what I get with my town and what I get with this state, I feel like it's a pretty fair deal all in all. And I'm thrilled to be living in this state. And like I said, I think most people are. To your point, though, about the young people, and thank goodness for them, and the OK Boomer movement, if you will, because I had been saying for the previous couple of years, I literally started doing my podcast when Donald Trump showed up, because I thought, someone's got to document this. This is bad. This is bad. All of those shootings that were happening, and Parkland is one that jumps to mind. The kids walking out, David Hogg and all them, and I thought, these kids are going to turn 18 in 2 years. Who do you think they're going to vote for? It was pretty clear that these kids recognize that the Republican Party is about, especially the gun lobby, but lobbyists in general, and that they don't care about the people. And I've had this argument now with several Republicans. We just had Ben Proto on the other day, who I thought it typified why these guys keep losing elections, especially in this state. He thinks that all liberals think the exact same way, whereas there's a great diversity of thought in the Republican Party. And I thought that's nonsense. And again, it tells me I think, a big part of the reason why you can't beat these guys because you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, probably I think one of the greater problems in our politics right now is that we used to have two parties that each stood for something, and compromise could be made because you try to find some common ground between their differing visions for their community and that community's future. Now, it's not clear to me what the Republican Party stands for, and I'd welcome a conversation with Ben or anybody else about what they're for, not just what they're against. I've spent the last 4 years in Hartford, sitting beside Republican colleagues who they love to press that red nay button. They love to vote no, but they're a lot less hesitant to actually propose bills and to try to find compromise. In Hartford, it's still possible sometimes. There is still a diversity of thought within the Republican Party. I do have some Republican colleagues who I cherish and have had the opportunity to work with, but I don't see any of that happening in Washington, D.C. National Republicans seem to have fallen in line behind President Trump, and in doing so, really can only tell you that they want to investigate Hunter Biden, that they want to hold on to their gas stove, maybe that they like or dislike Kevin McCarthy, but they can't tell you how they're going to improve the lives of American people. They can't tell you how they're going to make it easier for you to send your kid to college, how they're going to make it easier for you to buy your first home, to start a small business, to retire in the community in which you built their lives. They're not proposing any of those ideas. So we as Democrats are in this challenging moment, as you said, where we don't have anybody or anything to debate with, to compromise with. There's nothing on the other side very often other than antagonism. And that's a real problem for our politics because we need two parties. That's the bedrock of American and so many other democracies. We need opposing ideas in order to find the best solution.
You know, I interviewed you literally on a conservative radio station as someone who's not a conservative, and the audience gets very angry when I point out things like, you guys keep losing these elections. It's been, since the 80s, and then well before that too. It's been mostly Democrats in charge in this state. And I was trying to explain to the audience for several months leading up to the election that just being against things, just saying that you don't like Ned Lamont, saying that, crime's out of control when the numbers don't back any of that up. It seems to me, and I think this is one of the other things we saw last week in DC while they were attempting to elect a speaker in the House of Representatives, that these guys don't live in reality. And as you just said, it looks like the agenda for the gang in DC is going to be, let's investigate Hunter Biden, this hot new thing with Joe Biden and the classified documents. That's top of mind. And it's like, I've seen where Kevin McCarthy's like, we're doing what the American people put us here to do. And I don't think the American people are that concerned about Hunter Biden. I think they are concerned about inflation. And the reason there wasn't a red wave was, again, I think people, by and large in this country, look to the right and were like, yikes, no thanks, not interested. And those guys aren't really saying anything to inspire. Again, it's the Democrats' bet. Okay, what do you have? And it seemed like they had nothing. And so I don't think they can be, A, surprised at the poor results that they had, and B, that they're in sort of a state of who's in charge of that party? Who are they even following? They don't want to follow Kevin McCarthy. Donald Trump seems like he's kind of off to the sideline now. There's a serious void in leadership in the Republican Party, I believe.
It's scary, Joe. It really is. You said something that really struck me a moment ago, which is that the choices voters have to face. I'm no longer an elected official, no longer a politician. I'm a voter now. And when I get ready to cast my ballot, I'm going to look at sort of the concrete policy proposals of each candidate. And the Republicans in this most recent gubernatorial election, Bob Stefanowski, he said taxes were too high. Sure, his taxes are too high. My taxes are too high. How are you going to lower them? His promise to eliminate the income tax, which, by the way, accounts for more than a third of Connecticut's revenue, it wasn't realistic. People laughed it out of the room because how would we afford to fund our public schools? How would we afford to fill potholes on the road, to perform basic fire and police and EMT functions? It's a joke. If they want to be seriously considered by the voters, then they have to put forward serious policy proposals. They can't just complain about a problem. They also have to tell us how they're going to fix it. And in terms of electoral strategy, I'm enjoying it as a Democrat, don't get me wrong, but I think it's absolutely madness that the Republican Party has decided to alienate young voters, because we are going to be by the next election, we're going to be millennials and Gen Z voters combined will be a larger voting bloc than baby boomers. And that means that the issues we care about, student loan relief and making college more affordable, addressing the crisis of climate change so that we can live happy and healthy lives, doing something, anything about the uniquely American problem of gun violence, protecting reproductive freedom that our parents and grandparents enjoyed, but which is now very much hangs in the balance and in jeopardy for our generation. All of these issues, the Republican Party has decided that they're going to be on the wrong side of. And in doing so, they're alienating members of my generation. And it's to their enormous political detriment. I mean, what do they think is going to happen when Donald Trump tweets angry things about Greta Thunberg? What do they think is going to happen when Marjorie Taylor Greene runs around the Capitol berating people like David Hogg and other survivors of the Parkland shooting? Young people are not going to be sympathetic to that party. Young people are not going to seriously consider their ideas or not give their candidates the benefit of the doubt. Instead, the very opposite is happening. Young people are turning out to vote like never before. They're running for office like never before, which is really exciting to me. And they're doing so largely to fight the Republican Party. And that poses an existential threat to my friends on the other side of the aisle, one they have to really grapple with.
I thought it was interesting when Bob Stefanowski brought Glenn Youngkin up here and kind of started to wade into the culture war, got into the whole transgender thing. And it's like, are you watching what's happening in his state? The kids are walking out in support of transgender rights. Like, you're right. It stuns me. I was a Republican for a large portion of my life. I mean, literally Donald Trump showed up and I was like, yeah, I think we're done here. Their tone deafness towards, especially like you said, young people who are every day someone's turning 18 and that base is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, as you said, and they're outpacing the boomers. This is bad news. Again, I don't understand what the Republican Party is doing. I don't understand what they're thinking. And it seems to me that their number one strategy these days is no matter what the Democrats say, they're just going to be the opposite of that.
They even said they started to say the quiet part out loud, Joe. There was one Republican on Fox News just a few months ago who said, it's time to raise the voting age. I've got bad news. First of all, you can't raise the voting age easily. And second of all, we're going to turn 21 or 25 eventually, right? They can't keep hiding from Gen Z. They can't keep hiding from millennials. The other thing that just kills me, you mentioned Glenn Youngkin. Republicans try to govern via controversy, govern via scandal. They just chase memes and likes on Twitter or whatever the more conservative version of Twitter is these days, rather than looking at the problems that are happening in our own backyard. This year in Connecticut, we're only 2 weeks into the new year, and already there have been 11 shootings in Connecticut. 5 people have died. 5 other people have been injured. And I haven't heard a Republican talk about it, not on the local level, not on the state level. And I haven't heard Republicans in Washington, D.C. have been so busy fighting with each other, sometimes literally and physically on the House floor, that they're not paying attention to the actual problems that are impacting our lives, the actual losses that their communities are experiencing.
I'm also shocked by, again, they're very excited about their 5-vote majority in the House, didn't pick up any ground in the Senate, and yet somehow patted themselves on the back and believe, America wants us to be in charge and to lead this country. And I'm shocked by that. I'm shocked that they didn't see that election and go, oh boy, do we blow this big time? Because again, I think when you're talking about a record high inflation, right? 40-year high in inflation, Like that in and of itself, if they had a game plan, especially with the House, it should have been a rout. Like that's where the red wave should have come. They shot themselves in the foot. They don't recognize it. And as you just pointed out, I mean, they're literally fighting with each other. But again, I think the most shocking thing we saw last week was Donald Trump appealing to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, like, just get behind McCarthy. And they were like, no, that didn't used to happen.
They're not governing humbly by any stretch of the imagination. When Joe Biden won, he frustrated a lot of Democrats and a lot of people on the left by he won with more votes than any president in United States history. He could have gone in there feeling excessively confident, saying we're going to do it my way or the highway. And he did just the opposite. He reached out to folks on the other side of the aisle. He insisted on bipartisanship. He passed the biggest transportation infrastructure investment since the Eisenhower administration with Republican votes. Ned Lamont had largely the same approach. Right after he got elected, I think he frustrated a lot of Democrats by saying to everybody, not just those who had supported him on the campaign trail, but everybody, hey, I have an open door policy. If you have a good idea, come and knock on my office, sit down, let's talk about it. I don't care what party you are. That's, I think, the crux of governing humbly, not going in there and saying the American people elected us, so we have all the answers and we're going to ignore the folks on the other side of the aisle. But that's, unfortunately, pretty much the Republican approach. The Republican approach is, hey, we've got a 5-vote majority, and therefore we've got this covered. We're gonna solve all the problems. Of course, they can't even manage to find any agreement within their own caucus. And this, by the way, reveals what we were talking about earlier: the fact that the Republican Party is so good at standing against things, they've lost track of what they stand for. The concessions that Kevin McCarthy had to make in order to become speaker on the 15th ballot, they're going to be incredibly corrosive to his ability to govern and also his ability to find common ground within the caucus, right? I mean, there were folks on the far right who were forcing major limits on spending. Well, how are the very pro-defense spending military hawks in Kevin McCarthy's caucus going to like the idea that all of a sudden defense spending has to be drastically curtailed because Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert and some other folks put their foot down? It's a untenable majority because they don't have a unifying set of beliefs. They don't have a unifying agenda. And that's true of Republicans nationally, but I hate to say it, it's trickled down, and it's true of Republicans even locally as well.
My thought is 4 years from now, there's not a Republican in Connecticut in my mind who I think has a legitimate chance to run for governor. I don't know. Nobody's jumping to mind. I mean, there's a couple of, I heard some names, bandied about, but again, I think because that party right now stands for nothing, because that party in this state is virtually sitting on the sidelines. I mean, that's where they are right now. This state somehow got bluer in the last election, which, again, I was shocked that I'm happy it happened, but I was very surprised that it happened. The state of the Republican Party, especially in Connecticut, and the thing that really got me was, Jamie Stevenson, who ran against Jim Himes, she's a very moderate, very reasonable, very sane Republican, and she got trounced by as many points as, Looney Leora Levy did to Dick Blumenthal. So again, my thought is these guys are so far outside where most people are living, except for people that are on the right. And it's at the point now where if you're on the right, you're on the far right. There's not even a moderate right at this point. There just isn't, because the leadership is moving further and further to the right. I just don't see them having any success in the near term future.
Well, on Jamie Stevenson and Jim Himes down in the 4th District, full disclosure, Jim is a very close friend. But Jamie could have been a really formidable candidate. The challenge that she faced, I think, is that in order to succeed in today's Republican Party, in order to be embraced by her own side, let alone go out and, persuade all the voters that actually decide an election in the middle, she had to tweet and say some things that were frankly conspiratorial about COVID-19, masks, vaccines, things that really surprised me given her prior record of, reasonable leadership in Darien. So that was a disappointment to me. Of course, I was very happy that Jim Himes won, but I was disappointed that even moderate Republicans in Fairfield County felt the need to kowtow to the far right wings of their own party and inject really dangerous rhetoric into the social media world about vaccines, which are actually helping to save lives and end this pandemic. The other thing I'll say that probably is going to piss off members of my own party, but I'm not an elected official anymore, so I can do that more these days. I hope that we have a good Republican candidate for governor. I hope that we continue to have Democratic control, but I think that democracy is stronger when incumbents and every candidate has their feet held to the fire. I think that voters deserve a choice between two competent candidates and two opposing ideas. I hope that the Democrat wins out in that contest, but it would be a disappointment to me if Republicans decide to abdicate their role in governing, because yes, they're in the minority, but they also represent hundreds of thousands of people in the state of Connecticut. And I know personally that Governor Lamont invites them to the really hard project of addressing our looming pension crisis, of helping to rebuild our economy and bring even more jobs in Connecticut. He invites them to the project of rebuilding our infrastructure so that it belongs in the 21st century, so that our trains are faster than they were 50 years ago. The issues I just talked about, they aren't partisan, or at least they shouldn't be. And Republicans, I hope will decide that they want to be a part of the solution, not just a part of identifying the problem, which is the role that they've seemed to be, have played for so long. If they decide to do that, then we might have a Republican who is a viable challenger for governor in 4 years. And that would be good for the voters and good for democracy. And then I hope that the Democrat wins after that.
Yeah. It's funny. I spoke to Rob Hoytling, the independent candidate, right after the election. He had called Governor Lamont and conceded. And like you just said, Governor Lamont said to him, you had some great ideas in the debate. I'd love to talk to you more about those ideas. And I have heard from quite a few Republicans, too, who say, this guy's very open to, and that's my whole thing, right? These are not Republican or Democratic problems. They're problems we all have. And working on them together is how government used to work. And I hope we can get back to that, because that really seemed to be the best way that worked.
Absolutely. The Republican Party that my grandparents belonged to cared about fiscal responsibility. That's why I was so surprised when we got to Hartford to find that it was actually the Democratic Party that was pushing to fill up our rainy day fund to make sure that if there's a recession in the future, we don't have to raise taxes in order to fund critical services so that we can have fiscal stability. It was the Democratic Party that was pushing the issue of making sure that we fully funded our pensions so that our kids and our grandkids, future taxpayers, aren't left holding the bag, that they don't have this cloud hanging over their head that we all experience that eats up so much of the tax revenue. It was the Democratic Party pushing to make sure that for future employees, we're actually making promises that are a little bit less generous, more reasonable and fully funded. And Republicans sometimes joined in that work, but sometimes opposed it. I remember my jaw dropped when one of my Republican colleagues said, how about we take all the money that we're putting in the rainy day fund and instead we spend it on some, projects in our district. I can't remember what he wanted to spend it on, but I thought, hang on, the world is upside down. You guys used to be the party of fiscal responsibility. And now it's actually our Democratic governor, Ned Lamont, who wakes up every single day and thinks about Connecticut's credit rating. He wants to make sure that Wall Street agencies see that we are paying off our debt, that we are building a sound fiscal future for the taxpayers of tomorrow. That's now the Democratic Party's mantra. And the Republican Party seems less and less interested in that.
Yeah, it's interesting how that's worked out, isn't it? Well, before we wrap things up, I did want to bring up the book, 100,000 First Bosses, My Unlikely Path as a 22-year-old Lawmaker. Now that you're a 26-year-old law school student, the book is out on paperback. Congratulations on that. Just talk a little bit about the writing of the book, what led to it, and how's it going as far as sales are going? Are you doing well with that?
I'm so excited that the book is out in paperback. I hope it's going to make it even more accessible for all people, especially young people. I wrote this book to peel back the curtain a little bit on state government. I wanted people to know the funny, the ugly, the scary, the inspiring about what actually happens at the state capitol and how laws are made. And most of all, I wanted them to know that our democratic system can be frustrating. It can be the source of a whole lot of stress and anxiety, but it ultimately still works. It still allows an underdog candidate to run against somebody who's been in office for longer than he has been alive. I feel so lucky to have had the chance to serve my constituents for the last 4 years. I'm going to miss this job terribly, but writing the book was such a fun experience because it gave me an opportunity to encourage other young people to take their own leap of faith in their own district. And since then, to your question about how it's doing, I don't look at the numbers in terms of how it's selling, but I get a call every week or every other week from a young person who's picked up the book and is thinking about starting their own campaign for city commissioner in Mississippi, for state senate in Ohio, for state representative in Minnesota. Those stories make me so optimistic about the future. And if it inspires even one other person to run for office, it will have been worth writing it, in my mind.
That is so awesome. And how's law school going? You and Katie, everything's going well?
Katie's great. We're getting married in September. Law school is, a
Nice.
challenge. First year, famously a lot of reading, but I'm actually enjoying it. And, I'm not far. I'm just in New York City. So I'll be keeping tabs on Connecticut politics, watching things closely. And I hope, you and I can keep in touch.
I very much look forward to it. Will Haskell, I always appreciate the time and the great insight, fun conversation. And best of luck to you in law school, and congratulations on the wedding. We'll definitely talk before September, though. So, yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Have a good
I
one.
give it. You got it, buddy. That's going to do it for us this evening. We're back Monday night at 5 o'clock with Connecticut Politics TV Live.